So we are officially in spring. It's the 1st of September. Welcome, welcome to Positive Pyjama Chats for Spring. Thanks for joining us this morning. Today we've got a chat. Alexis often joins us anyway, but today is a more official chat with Alexis. We have been speaking about that whole mind-body connection around looking after our posture, around looking after, how we sit, how we stand, and how we move our body, and how that really can impact our whole mindset and can really make a difference and help us to stay more positive. So as an osteopath, I'm asking Alexis to put her osteo hat on today and have a chat with us about how that can really make a difference. Alexis particularly works with the real flow of the whole body. So she's absolutely perfect to chat with us about this concept. Today, I don't know whether you guys who are very health focused anyway have heard of the concept from either physics, the concept of tensegrity, or from a health perspective, BioTensegrity, but Alexis is going to tell us all about what that is and how that relates to this concept of connecting the body and mind together. So Alexis, can I maybe start with helping us to recap briefly on a really good standing or sitting posture and how that can impact the body?
Okay, so with standing and sitting postures, our aim is to make sure each part in a biomechanical perspective is sitting on top of each other in the best alignment possible. So we are wanting, if we're sitting, for our feet to be flat on the floor. And if we're standing, we want to be allowing our feet to have equal pressure from the front to the back and left to right on front and back, so that we've got a good grounding. And our arch in our feet is likely to already be working then. Then we're wanting our knees on top of our feet. When we're standing, our knees on top of our feet, our hips on top of our knees, our shoulders on top of our hips, and our neck on top of our shoulders.
Wow.
So it should all be in one big straight line. And the best way to help us to reach that is to imagine that there's a string pulling you up from the center of your head. So if you're sitting like this and you suddenly start to pull up, then you'll start to notice that your neck comes back and your head tilts slightly forward so that your chin is parallel to the floor.
Right.
Your shoulders are naturally back. You're not pulling them back. They're just naturally sitting.
So they're relaxed.
Relaxed. Correct. It allows your chest to be open so that you can breathe properly. It allows you to keep your natural curvatures of the spine. So there's a slight forward bend in the upper back, just slight, and a slight backward bend in the lower back. That allows your spine to have that shock absorbing ability.
Right.
And then your pelvis is sitting correctly. And that allows that your pelvic floor to be switched on, and your transab and lower back supporting muscles to be switched on, and all of your general posture muscles that keep everything safe and strong to be naturally, unconsciously switched on.
Lovely. So it is doing what we need the body to do, working for us rather than...
Yes. So the correct muscles are on. They're using the energy correctly. We're not using extra muscles, which takes too much of our energy and makes those muscles likely to get tight and sore.
Awesome. Okay. So Alexis, looking at posture from a biotensegrity perspective, can you explain maybe what biotensegrity actually is?
So biomechanics is looking at the body in a parts versus parts section. So they're segmented and they're just stacked on top of each other. But when we're looking at a biotensegrity approach, it's the tension between all of the structures of the body, and it's seeing the body as one interconnected whole. So it's like we are, in fact, just one complete continuous bag. And so those who already know about health and manual therapies are generally quite aware of what fascia is. Fascia is this one connected bag. And within that bag, that's where we have the bones and the tendons and the ligaments and the muscles and the nerves and all the arteries and veins and things. They all grow within that one bag.
Right.
So when we start, we're just the one thing. And as the pressure gets pushed and pulled, things change. So as an embryo, the pressure on that segment is what determines the type of tissue that is created. So when you've got a compression force that's going on in that area, that part of the embryo needs to create more structure and strength. So it calcifies that area and starts to create bone. When you've got an area that's constantly being pulled, that's when you're getting a long, strong connective tissue like tendon or ligament.
Right.
And when it constantly has to move like this,
going both directions, push and pull.
That's right. Then you're getting this elastic muscle that starts to form.
Right.
And then you've got in that embryo, you've got all of the fluids initially just bathing everywhere. And as all these structures start to change and move, and they create this shaping, you then create canals where the fluid starts to flow.
Right.
And those canals then become your arteries and veins and lymphatic tissues. But so within that, it's all within the one bag. So you might have a torso. If we just look at the torso, you're all the way from the top to the bottom of the pelvis. You've kind of got a couple of bags in there, but it's all within the one bag. So there are separations, but they're all still linked. And it's the fascia that is that link.
Wow. So intimately linked. They're not just connected to each other, but they're intimately linked together, right, coming from the same initial cells outwards as we grow as embryos.
Absolutely.
Wow. Gracious. Okay. So
when you're looking at the BioTensegrity icosahedron there, you've got a basic circle, sort of sphere type thing, and you've got the big wooden rods there, which are similar in the human body to a bone, I apologize. Then you've got the string in between. They are similar to muscle and tendon and ligament and those sorts of things. And you can see that in that specific structure, the bone's not necessarily touching each other. So it's not the bone connecting with the bone that's actually holding that shape as a shape. It's the tension between all of those structures that allows it to stay upright, that gives it its shape, and that allows it to withstand gravity and whatever other forces come about. So that's what tensegrity and biotensegrity actually is. It's that tension between all of those structures that gives it the shape and the form and the function.
Wow. Okay, that's a big mouthful. There's a lot of detail in that whole concept explanation, but thank you for that, because that really helps understand why even a small change can have quite a significant effect on like a small change in one part of the body can have a significant effect on other parts of the body that are not visually or conceptually necessarily directly connected.
Absolutely.
Maybe you could give us an example so that we can understand a little bit better. So from a biotensegrity perspective, then how do strains and injuries and other body dysfunctions, how do they affect or influence our posture?
So when you've got this one structure, that movement in one spot is going to affect every other location. If you've got even a small strain or injury or irritation in one section, every other part of the system or human body has to have some kind of compensation for that. So you can see in that biotensegrity model of the icosahedron there, when the man's gently pulling, he's only pulling in two spots, but the whole shape totally changes. And when there's a compression also, you're only compressing in certain spots, but the whole thing distorts. And that means every single joint and ligament and tendon in that picture, so the connection between and the rods and the strings, all have a different tension to what they originally had on them. So that means that if you have a small strain in your body, say, for example, your toe, you might walk differently because of the pain, and that's going to affect how things are. But also that specific strain in the toe doesn't just affect the toe or just the foot, or even just the toe and foot and ankle. But once you've got, so for example, it's making you hold up your arch more or it's making you drop your arch more, that will directly affect how your toe is working and how your ankle is working, and then it moves all the way up the body. So when we're walking, you've got the arch and then the pressure on the big toe as you step forward. And if that arch is constantly dropping, then the big toe ends up getting a whole lot more pressure on it. So in order to cope with that pressure, that toe has to change. And what happens is you can sort of see here, it's very hard, especially because my finger doesn't move that way, but it kind of creates an outward pressure. And so you end up getting that moving away from the body. And then you've got more pressure on that outside part of that big toe.
Is that leading into like a bunion shape?
That's exactly right. So as I said in the embryology, when you've got an area where there's more compression or more requirement for strength, the body creates bone. So that area is now getting extra pressure in an area that it didn't before. So it responds by creating bone.
So just because we're an adult doesn't mean that we're not
Our body is dynamic.
growing and changing. Wow.
Right. So now you've got this one position. That's not going to happen in 5 minutes or 1 year. This is a long-term thing. However, you can see that those forces change instantly.
Yeah.
And with that, you get, so you've got the heel and then the rest of the foot, and you get a change in angle there as well. And that creates extra pressure and strain here. That continues all the way up so that the knees tip inwards and the hips tip inwards. And when your hips tip inwards, let's drop it back a little bit. When your hips tip inwards, you've got nothing. You basically, so I'm just moving my hips inwards. You move your hips inwards, your bottom juts out, and you get an increase in the lumbar lordosis. So with that, you've got a strain through the pelvis, and you've got an increase in pressure through that lumbosacral junction where the pelvis and the spine meet.
Right.
And it pushes your stomach forward, so you get that bulging of the stomach, and the stomach muscles can't function properly. And then if you have that happening unevenly on either side of the foot, like the feet, so if one foot does it more, then you're also going to get a twist in the pelvis and probably a rotation. And that sets up this twisting all the way up the spine. And then as your body's trying to compensate to make sure that your eyes stay parallel so that you can see clearly and get that proper stereoscopic vision, you get a kink and then a kink and then a kink and then a kink.
Right, as the body compensates this direction and that.
And you'll find if you get an increase in that lumbar lordosis, there's almost, your body either becomes like this and hyper straight the other way, or you get an increase in those curves, and so you actually end up like this. So then you're going to end up with shoulder problems and neck problems and top of the neck head problems.
Right.
So just from that one thing in the foot, your person presenting to our clinic could have a foot problem, or knee, or hip, or lower back, or mid back, or rib cage, or breathing problems, or shoulder problems, or neck pain, or headache, or pretty much anything else.
Wow.
It just depends on where that person feels at first. So in order to treat that, then we actually need to start at the area that they're feeling their pain. But if we want to make sure that pain doesn't come back, and if we want to make sure that pain doesn't transform into some other area of the body, we need to work right back to where that initial strain comes from, or multiple strains, because we don't generally just have one problem going on.
No, and those complexities makes the whole thing that much more
complex.
Indeed. Wow. Okay, so that's pretty amazing for the body to be able to respond in that way so thoroughly, so intensely. But it makes sense. And it probably, as I often say to my clients, the knee bone is connected to the neck bone,
right?
Because it just feels that way. There are obviously things in between, like the whole torso. But even one small change can have quite a significant effect, not only in that area, but in other areas, and likely all over the body, as you were saying, that a foot problem can actually come in, and that's where the problem started. But what they're suffering now with is a headache or who knows what. And So how does this affect, Alexis, how we actually deal with pain or misalignment?
How we deal with it? Well, basically, the way we deal with it is when somebody comes in with pain in one area, we're always looking at the whole body, and we're looking to see either what that one strain, or for example, if it was actually a trauma, so it happened directly to that one area,
right,
where that change in forces has dispersed to deal with all of those repercussions, or we're looking for all the other areas that may have led to that happening. So the way we're dealing with pain is looking at the whole body, trying to affect the way each muscle is functioning so that we're creating better energy usage, trying to reduce all of those strains. And by doing that, we're also reducing. So if you've got an area that's sitting in a suboptimal position, by using that muscle or area as you ordinarily would, you almost can't help but create a repetitive strain type injury. So for example, if your shoulder is sitting forwards and this is no longer like in the correct position, you've already got extra strain in that area.
Yeah.
So you're going to end up with a repetitive strain injury from doing your normal everyday functions. So we have to deal with that muscle that's been strained, but we also need to deal with that whole area that's created the possibility of that muscle being used wrongly.
Cool. Okay. So if I understand correctly, Alexis, when we're out of alignment like that, we're avoiding pain or just using muscles incorrectly for whatever reason. The body is then compensating in various different ways, and that can affect more systems in the body than just our skeletal system.
Absolutely. So even without the pain component, if we go back to we've got now an increased lumbar lordosis and an increased thoracic kyphosis, all of a sudden our body is in a compressed state. You've got increased pressure on the whole rib cage and lungs and heart.
Right.
So reduced space means that your heart literally isn't going to have the space to function as it would like to. And your lungs, you're going to find it much harder to have a full breath. So with breathing, that means if you're not breathing properly, you're likely to be increasing your stress levels just because of the direct connection of a shallow breath will create a mental stress sensation. You're also not going to be giving your body enough oxygen. So from just that, it's possible that you actually turn up with cardiovascular issues.
Right.
Or just respiratory issues. Or because you're not getting enough oxygen, your brain won't be functioning the same way. So you'll have brain fog or more likelihood of headaches or blurred vision or a huge variation of possibilities.
Right. Okay. And I can imagine that with the pain and with shallowness of breath, for example, and other things like that, there's an element of energy drain that happens. And so your natural resilience to dealing with life, and that's going to add to stress as well. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So like I touched on with, if you're not using the correct postural muscles that are actually set up to have a constant contraction, then you'll be using your movement muscles, which are meant for contract, relax, contract, relax.
So short bursts.
And if they're then meant to be suddenly on all the time, then they don't have a chance of, of recovery. So they will be hyper stressed and hypertense and spasming. They will be using a lot more energy to do that because that's not their function.
Right.
And that's not how the body's set up. So you'll be using a lot more energy, which means that energy is then not available for all sorts of other things. So if you've got a sore foot and you try walking, you can probably remember that you don't want to walk for very far because it's really effortful. It uses a lot more effort, and you end up potentially, even the way you're walking, you feel a discomfort in your shoulder or some other place because of how you've been holding yourself in a strange position. So then you're bringing on extra muscles that aren't even required, and that uses even more energy.
Wow. So more convolutions, not just push and pull here, but an exacerbated ongoing effect that can really make an impact in how we feel all day, every day, and impact just our life in general on a daily sort of basis. So thank you, Alexis. That really helps bring home some really solid ideas. I can see that Maria has raised her hand.
I have a client that had a foot problem. Physio's stuck her in a boot and has insisted that she stays in the boot. I've got more problems now than I ever had before, but because the physio said she has to stay in the boot. And basically all he's done is stuck her in a boot, sent her home, no exercise, no stretches, that's it. Where I've been massaging all of her back, all of her legs, mobilized the talus because talus dysfunction, which affects the upper back, but he's insisted she stays in the boot. What's your view on that?
Could you ask if they could do taping it instead? At least that way there's pressure on the foot and the foot can actually move a little bit more normally, and you don't have the difference of leg length issue as well, because the boot is like that much bigger.
Yeah, and he didn't even accommodate for that with the other leg.
Yeah.
So therefore, I've now got other problems because they just don't think about it. You know what I mean? So I think I might be better off than taping it myself because I know how to tape.
Yep.
And tell her to get off the boot.
Yep.
And then see what happens with the physio. But he's just adamant that
the taping
she has to.
The taping actually does add extra support to those muscles and ligaments, and your client is likely to have less pain because of that as well. So it's way better than a boot, I think.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Wow.
Thanks.
Good question, Maria.
Yes.
I don't know if you remember years ago, I had a yoga client with similar issues, and I think you do it with the fascia.
Yes.
Do you remember her? May not remember that.
Would it have been Liz?
Anyway, no.
Okay, go on.
Can't remember her. I remember what she looks like, can't remember her name. But anyway, it was similar sort of a problem with the boot. And certainly you were able to fix it much better without the boot.
Yep. So sometimes the boot is required, but I would say for as little time as possible. And if you're going to do the boot, then you want to aim not to be walking very much, but you need time without the boot as well to allow the strength to happen in all the directions that are required for that, all the tissues to heal properly.
And to build their malleability as well as their strength back up again.
Yeah, so that they don't lose all of their mobility also.
Yeah, it's healing is interesting.
Yes.
It's not a one section thing.